everybody, my name is Luke from Gospel House Ministries, and welcome to a Valentine's Day special. And I am not alone in this video. I am with my good friend Layne.
Hi.
And he is going to be joining with me in this video talking about genuine love. That's the title for today's video. So I love it if we could all open our Bibles to 1 Corinthians 13, which is, you guys probably recognize this passage. What we're doing is that in 1 Corinthians 13, this is Paul writing to them, talking about love, right? The way of love. Probably recognize this passage, but once again, we're going to dive deep into this passage to really see what love really truly means. Because as the disclaimer is going to say, is that the word love in today's society is defined as romantic or sexual, and that's raw because that's what our world preaches. As a teenager, the first thing I think about with love is I think about a couple, right? There's something more than just that. God intended love to be something more than just romantic or sexual. Of course, that's also involved within love, but there's something more than just those two words that our world wants to define it by. So he's going to read 1 through 3 of 1 Corinthians 13.
If I speak to tons of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, then I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing.
So we see point number 1, we see love is committable. And basically that is kind of a pledge. As I looked up the word, that it's a pledge that you claim to. What this is talking about as we look at subpoint A is that we see blabber and booming. And that sounds a little weird, but what he's saying is that recognize what it says in verse 1. It says, if I speak in tongues of men and of angels. So let's cut that right there. That is talking about language. I think it's talking about
the spoken word of God's children.
Do you think it also possibly means like if we had, like this is talk about kind of the gifts. So if we have like the gift to, let's say we can know all languages. We can speak to like an Asian person and a Japanese person. We can speak to all these people. We know all the languages, and we even have a language of speaking to angels in heaven, but we don't have love, then we are nothing. And then letter B is powers and proficiency, which is basically if I have power and if I have knowledge. So he's saying that if I have prophetic powers, if I can tell the future, just like the Old Testament, right? All those prophets that God sent that was going to prophesy either the Messiah or what was going to come, if we had the ability to tell the future, or if we had the ability to understand every mystery, we don't need Sherlock Holmes. We just know all the mysteries. And if we know all knowledge, right, we don't have to worry about a test anymore. Because hey, we already know all the knowledge. And if we have all faith to move mountains, as Jesus would say, if you have just as little of this faith, you can move this mountain. But if we have all of that, and we don't have love, guess what? We're nothing. We're nothing. And then he continues. He's not done yet. In verse 3, now we see worthless sacrifice. He says in verse 3, if I give all I have and deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. That's kind of sad, honestly. So like all the people that did rituals, maybe, if I think about that, like they sacrifice for what? So if you sacrifice your own life, but it's not for a love, it's not for a love for some person, whoever, then we're nothing.
If you think about sacrifice, like people in biblical times, right after Jesus had died, there were Christians, like active Christians, who were being burned at the stake for no other reason than the Caesar's enjoyment. Yeah. So when they give up their lives, did they give up their lives for the continuement of like the Christian faith, or did they give up their lives merely just because they had to? Like they were Christians. Christians were going to be burned. Why? Why were they burned?
Yeah.
Jesus comes to us and he says, "Love everybody like I have loved." Basically, how did Jesus love people? Jesus didn't love people as a merely material relationship. There was no like sexual or romantic aspects to Jesus' love ever. It was broad and it was deep for every person alive, which is amazing,
right?
And it's beautiful. This last verse, it talks about the body being burned, and it talks about giving up all that you have, all of our material, like all of the stuff that we own, all of our friends, all of our family, all of our possessions amount to nothing if you don't love them. So like if you look at your phone and you're like, I enjoy this item because it connects me to people. Or you read a book and you're like, I love that book, and so now I'm going to own that book. You know, the possession means nothing without love.
Right.
Which is crazy. But without love, you know, it's worthless. So where do you go from there? It's amazing. It's so beautiful.
So I think the last thing to come off point number one, I think the point is that love cannot be nothing. I think love has to be something that we commit ourselves to, right?
Honestly, I feel like everything that exists without love is nothing, because when you apply yourself to any aspect, like nobody's living in this world without love.
Yeah.
You know? Everybody's got one thing.
Right.
One thing above other things that they love. Like I'm all for my job and I'm all for my knives, which is funny. But when I look at my knife, I love it because it's useful. You know what I mean?
Right.
God didn't look at us and love us because we were useful. I'm not useful. I am purely one of his children.
So now we're going to jump into 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7. Verses 4 through 7. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things.
To jump into that, we're going to go with point number 2. It says that love is characterized. Now, these verses are very clear on what the aspects of love are. Point A is going to be that love is patient, kind, grateful, and humble. Verse 4 says that love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast, and it is not arrogant. When you look at a person and you love them, such as your family member, when you look at your family member, how can you love them better so as to mirror these aspects of love? Because if love is patient and kind, do you mirror those aspects to your family members or to your friends or to just your associates in life? I think it's important to look at how kindness and patience can be tied into not only brotherly love, but intimate love. It's important how being grateful can be humble tie into that, because each of us has our own downfalls in life.
Yeah.
Every person looks at another person and says, you know, I'm doing really good right now, but if that person's not doing great, then, you know, I'm doing great. You know what I mean? So like if I look at you and I'm like, your life sucks, but I'm doing okay right now, then that's not me being humble, because I need to stoop to what Jesus stooped to and reach down and grab you, like Pastor Ed always says.
Yes.
You know, the only time we should look down on people is when we're helping them out. Point B is polite, thoughtful, and abrupt. What captures my attention about that is abrupt, because love is abrupt. Jesus' love, Jesus jumped right out in the middle of the ocean when he was 30, basically. You know, his ministry started right there, and he immediately went out, called his disciples by name, right? Now, Jesus showed so much love that he called them by name specifically, and caught them so off guard that they were immediately like, Jesus, I'm ready to follow you to the exclusion of all else. Love is abrupt, and it's kind of characterized as something that's a little bit extra. You know, what is life worth if there's not love in it? It's that little something on top. Point C is truthful plus obedient. When you're obedient to somebody, are you doing it for the right reasons? You specifically, what aspects about somebody makes you want to obey them?
I guess, you know, if they're truthful, right? If they're honest and they're not going to stab me in the back or, you know, betray me, then that's what I want to do to obey them.
Like the fruits of the Spirit.
Galatians 5.
When we look at somebody and we observe the fruits of the Spirit in that, and we observe love to be specifically, it makes us more inclined to be obedient. It's something that I feel like most of us miss on a daily basis, because when I look at somebody, I'm more inclined to listen to them if I've talked to them and I know them well. You know what I mean? But that's not how we should look at people. We should be, you know, obedient and patient to every person that walks by. And that's just how Jesus, you know, described life. But point D is firm, believes, is confident, and endurable. More than any other emotion or any other aspect of Jesus, his love was the most enduring thing. Right? Christ's love was the biggest aspect of him. That's what everybody remembers the most. Like, why did he die on the cross? He died because he loved humanity.
Yeah.
And why did he go to the cross? He didn't go because God told him to. He was God. Like, God was like, yes, I need you to go to the cross, but God is Jesus and Jesus is God. They both had the same plan. He went because he loved us. You know, the eternity that Christ is in, because he's not in time anymore.
Yeah.
He's in eternity. He's not only witnessed your entire life and all of your mistakes, but the mistakes of every person that you've ever met, and every person that you ever will meet, and every person that ever existed. And he loves each and every one of them, including people that are kind of controversial characters, you know what I mean? Like, people that we look at history and we're like, that was a terrible person.
Yeah.
And I bet all of us can think of a couple, but we're like, Jesus loved that person. He died for that person too. And that person might not make it to heaven, but Jesus still died for them. It was their choice, you know?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous to think about.
It
Honestly,
is.
for me, that's a crazy thing, because Jesus did die for terrible people, right?
Yeah.
You know, all the crazy people that I'm thinking about in my brain were alive after Jesus were. You know what I mean? It's like when I think about history and I'm thinking like dictatorships and, you know, like Nazi rebellions and like a bunch of wars, all of them were after Christ died. So Jesus also died for them and all the people who came before that. It's ridiculous. Mind blown.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh. Starting in verse 8, it says that love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. And as for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away.
So now we see point number 3, we see love is constant. We're going to see that as he is saying this, I think it's interesting in verse 8, subpoint A, it says that it's about gifts. It talks about the prophecies, like when we have the gift of prophecy, all the prophets back then, that was awesome. But look what it says. It says, but they will pass. And as for people that can speak in tongues, people, you know, that have this ridiculous language of talking to God, that's going to pass away.
I think it's also important to talk about those people because, you know, who were the people in the Bible who had those gifts? You had prophecy, which was Isaiah, Elijah, you know, and then we had people who spoke in tongues when the Holy Spirit came over the house and everybody had the flame over their head. People were speaking in tongues, every language imaginable. Yeah. And he had other people in the Bible, which I can't remember any right now. But he had other people in the Bible who were like, you know, speaking to people who they'd never met before, people who didn't speak their language. Yeah. Merely to pass the Bible. And then the last one is, as for knowledge. The wisest person in the Bible is Solomon. Yes. And he still died. You know, he passed away. His gift was lost.
Yeah, so it's unlike gifts, as point A would say. So all of these gifts that have been given to all these people, which when it comes to like the prophets, they could speak in tongues really well, or they were really smart. All those people, all of those gifts will pass away, but love does not. And then then it says prophecies, for we know in part that we prophesy in part. So subpoint B is unlike prophecies, right? So it just talks about prophecies, that prophecies, those prophets did those special gifts, and those are going to pass away. They're in part, they're partial.
It's also important to point out that they say in part because they didn't know everything. Yeah. Like the entire plan wasn't revealed to any specific person in the Bible. Like even Jesus when he was on earth, didn't know how the story was going to end. He knew that the battle was coming, and he knew that in the end they win. Yeah. But Christ didn't know when they were coming back. So it's kind of ridiculous to think about how every person who's been on earth only knew part of the story, which, you know, that's insane to think about because there's only one person who knew.
And now hear this. Look what it says in verse 10. It says, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. So instead of this being a negative thing, I'm going to say C, unlike perfection, saying that perfection is going to take all that partial stuff away. I feel like when we're in heaven, there's going to be no pain, no tears, no sickness, right? It's all going to be gone. So why do we need special gifts if we're all going to be perfect?
When the perfection comes, that's what it says. When the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When Jesus comes back, and he comes back to get us, if we're at that point in our faith, if Jesus came back right now, and I was ready, and I said, all right, let's go to heaven. Not only are we giving up what we have here, we are also giving up all that Christ gave us to have while we're on earth, right? So we're giving up all of our imperfect bodies, all of our earthly desires. We're giving up all of our possessions, friends, money. That's a possession. But we're giving it all up to go and live how Christ fully intended us to be. You know, because Christ is coming back, but he also made it to where we can also die and go to heaven. So in that sense of the phrase, all of us were intended to be in heaven. There's no way we're not going somewhere.
No.
If we're at that point in our relationship with God, we're going somewhere.
Right.
And we're going to pass into where Christ fully intended us to be.
If you think about it, it's because of Christ's love that was constant for us that allows us to get to heaven, so we could be perfect like with him.
And you know, also it's crazy to think about in the Old Testament, all the people who died before Jesus came, like they went somewhere.
Yeah.
So they went to Sheol and they waited for Christ's coming. You know what I mean? I don't think any of them were judged yet, because Christ hadn't come back to separate the people who were righteous and the people who weren't. But they went and they waited patiently for Christ's return. And it was only because of endless love that they were allowed to go anywhere. You know what I mean? Yeah. All of the heroes in the Old Testament, when the time came and Jesus came back, he said, you know, thank you for your faithfulness, or that good and faithful servant. You know, now ascend with me into heaven.
Right.
That kind of amazing love is something that I try to emulate every day, because it's something you don't see as a regular basis. It's not an attribute that would be, you know, attuned to earth.
Yeah.
Nobody on earth has Christ's love. Christ made an example of his love, and he asked us to follow it.
Yeah.
Which we still can't even do.
So now we're going to continue in verses 11 through 12. Verse 11 says, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I've been fully known."
Yeah, and that leads on to point number 4, which is love is clear. Jesus talked about all walks of life, but I feel like his favorite type of person was a child, because as a child, you don't have all of the selfish desires, you don't have all of the worldly knowledge. You are in and of yourself almost a pure image. Because, you know, we still sin as children, but you have achieved that pure image that Christ talked about.
Yeah.
You know, like when you get to heaven, you will be as a child, right? Who is strong in faith, but doesn't know the world. The youthful ways, it says, when I was like a child, I spoke like a child, I felt like a child, and reasoned like a child. And when I became a man, I gave up my childish ways. Christ also talked a lot about how when you reach that point, how you're supposed to act with your family, how you're supposed to act around your job, how you're supposed to treat the people that you know with brotherly love. You know, that's, you know, holy love, that's brotherly love, that's just common love, basically. Yeah. Christ talked about everything, but the main thing that he focused on was abstaining from worldly love. And the youthful ways, all that we're taught when we're young, you know, as we get older, is that the ways of the world are better for you, right? Worldly love isn't where we're supposed to be, though, because Christ told us that as a child, you have the most pure love, basically. And now you need to grow into faithful love, you know, as a mature, like a mature aspect of holy love.
Cross-reference that to I think it's in 1 John or something, that one of the epistles that he says, if you are of the world, you're an enemy of God.
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of that aspect of that when you're in the world, you're not really for God. It's like what Jesus says, right? You can't be 1 foot into money and 1 foot into me.
You can't serve two masters.
Yeah. He would even say that, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I came to divide. I think that's what love is that he's talking about, that you can't be just in the world and in me. You have to choose one or the other.
And also in Romans 12:9, it says, let love be genuine and abhor what is evil. So if our love is genuine, then aren't we following what Christ, set out. What is genuine love? That is the only example that Christ ever set. But it also talks about in verse 12, and this is kind of a shift, but in verse 12 it talks about how we can go from not really understanding our relationship with God to being there and seeing the full picture. It says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face." So what does that talk about? That could be that on this earth, in this life, where Christ has set us right here, we only have a dim reflection of what Christ actually wants us to have. Our relationship with Christ is only a dim reflection of what he wants us to have and what we will have in heaven. It says, "Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have never known, fully known before." So that's crazy to think about, because when we get to heaven, we'll see the full picture. God's plan will be revealed to us. Maybe not all aspects of it. We'll be in a timeless place. We'll be in eternity. And I feel like from that aspect, we'll be able to see eternity.
Right.
Which is something you don't think about, or I don't think about. But when you stumble upon eternity, I imagine you see clearly. Everything becomes sharp. And not sharp as an aspect of painful, but sharp as an aspect of everything will be revealed. Christ's love is holy, pure, crystal like the lake.
That's
it's
awesome.
Going to be great. So the last verse of this section is going to be verse 13. It says, "So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love."
So now we're going to jump into the very last point, which is point number 5, which is love is colossal. Colossal as in big, huge. We see that there are 3 attributes that are described right here, like we talked about in verses 4 through 7. But hear this. Paul ends the letter like this for a reason. He says, "Now faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love," which is why I meant colossal, because love is the biggest. Like, you can have all the faith, like what we talked about. You can have all the hope, all the confidence you have in your friends, but if you don't have love, you are nothing. So love overtakes faith and hope. It's all important, but love has to be the center in those 3. Like what Jesus would talk about, like he was faithful, he was confident, and he was loving enough to give himself up, to really give up his own life for us. So is there anything you want to add on that?
That at the root of each of these aspects is where, love abides. Faith. When we're faithful in something, why are we faithful? It's because of a grain of love. Like when you look at your parents and you trust them in something, it's because you love them. If you have a friend and you trust them with a secret, if you're faithful to that friend, it's because you love them. And hope too. When you hope in something, there's almost an adoration, almost an awe, which at the root is love. Paul is pointing out that in every aspect of our lives that is led in a Christ-like way, we should have at the root love.
Yes.
Faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love, because at the root of the other 2 is love, which I think is crazy. That's
awesome.
Ridiculous to think about.
We saw of how love is so much bigger than what we think. It's more than just romantic and sexual. This is something that is God-given love. God's love, I think God began love with the creation of the world. Just go to a mountain area, just go to a hill and look over and see the valley. Why is it so beautiful? Why? There's no way that a big explosion created this.
Even Paul talks about how you can find Christ in nature. And that's because God created not only us, but nature with love. Like he created nature for us to abide in. And put us in dominion over that place. Right? So he created nature in love too. So when we look at nature, we should see love.
That creation started with love. God started us with love. Hear that today. God created and started with love. So here's the takeaway that we're going to end off this video. Love is more than a word. It is a redemption story. You guys want to know what true love, what real love really looks like? Examine the cross. As Romans 5:8 would say that Christ died for us even though we were still sinners. Hear that. While we were still sinners. I heard this reel on Instagram when I was watching, and this guy's like, imagine Jesus just dropped the cross and start ridiculing everybody like, if you could have loved me more, if you could have done this, then I wouldn't have to suffer for this.
It would have been righteous. Yeah. It would have been righteous anger because we don't deserve anything that he's given us. If Christ did drop the cross and was like, you know what? All of you humans, you can just go straight to hell instead of coming with me to heaven. If Christ didn't do that, it would be righteous anger because we don't deserve any of it. But based on the love that he's shown and the love that he has, the eternal love, each of us has a place in heaven if we choose to follow him. You know, because every person has the opportunity to follow. I don't know a single person, believer or non-believer, who hasn't heard of Jesus. Everybody has the opportunity to follow Jesus. And I know there are people like on the other side of the world who don't have the opportunity to hear him. Yes. But that's why we're here. Yeah. To set up and to extend, you know. Yes. Christ said, extend to every branch of the earth. And he's talking to us too. He was talking to his disciples.
Yes.
But he was also talking to us and telling us to take it to where it needs to go, right? That eternal love is crazy. It says what is real, what is true.
What is
the cross?
Yeah, the cross
specifically.
Yes.
That was the entire point. What is real love? The cross.
It's not a heart shape that you make for your girl.
Yeah.
It is the cross. Maybe when you first get up, don't think about like the person that you want to impress. What does God's love really look like? Think about God's love first.
As you lead your way into Valentine's Day, try to keep in mind that the holy love that Christ showed for us was put on display. Yes. Each of us has an example. And if you're not following that example, is it possible that you don't know him as well as you thought you do? Because, you know, each of us struggles on a daily basis to find Christ. And if you're looking for Christ in worldly things, or looking for love in worldly things, then you're missing the point of holy love.
Holy love does not mean you have to be perfect. Guess what? God calls us saints because he looks at us through his son. You don't have to love perfect for God to love you. He already loved us. He already loved us. Yeah. He already loved us with the cross. So all we can do is give our best and say, God, here I am. Use me. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I need your help, and ask him every single day to help you. As we close this off, what is love to you? What does love really look like? What is genuine love to you? Love for human affection, or is it truly and genuinely for God and his creation? We are his love, believe it or not. If you're convicted and you feel like, man, I want this love. Everyone is just ridiculing you, and you want to know about God's love, who loves you enough to come to the cross and say, I love you. I'm going to die for you. I'm going to sacrifice my life for you. It's like with the prodigal son. The prodigal son came to the father, and the father wrapped his arms around him. Even though he did all those horrible things, he does the same thing for us. He wraps his arms and say, come daughter, come son. Come to me. I am here for you. There's a link in the description down below of how you can be saved through the true and genuine love of Jesus Christ, who died for us on the cross. My name is Luke.
My name is Layne.
And we'll see you hopefully very soon for another video. Happy Valentine's Day, and God bless you all.